I stumbled on the fraud of ESG, that ESG was being used as a marketing scam. We're pretending to the outside world that we're saving the world, but internally we're documenting and saying the absolute opposite. We're going to get in a lot of trouble for this. And the next thing you know, I was fired. My side of the story came out. Government overreach, high energy prices, censorship. I traveled for years in his circles. I was part of the World Economic Forum. I worked with his people.
What is Canada in for if Mark Carney becomes the leader of the country?
His brand is crisis. Carney's brand is crisis. And he's manufacturing the one, and that's duplicitous. It's not right. U.S. tariffs, that is just not like Canada's crisis. Electing Carney will be.
Today, we're joined by someone who spent decades at the top of global finance and who risked everything to expose how the public was being misled in the name of sustainability. Desiree Fixler is a former executive at Deutsche Bank and JP Morgan with over 25 years of experience in investment banking and sustainable finance. While serving as the Group Sustainability Officer at DWS for Deutsche Bank, she blew the whistle on widespread greenwashing, where firms made bold climate claims they weren't backing up behind the scenes. Her disclosures triggered formal investigations by the United States and German regulators, led to a police raid on DWS headquarters, and ultimately forced the resignation of the company's CEO and several top executives. Her case became a global turning point in exposing the credibility crisis within the sustainable investing industry and proved that her concerns weren't just valid, but systemic. Now, she's sounding the alarm on what she sees happening in Canada, specifically on Mark Carney, who is leading the Liberal Party into the federal election. Carney represents himself as a responsible economic steward, but Desiree argues he's something else entirely, a global technocrat pushing policies that concentrate powers in the hands of the financial elite, from net zero mandates that sideline democratic input to centralized digital currencies that could redefine privacy and control. She says Canadians are being sold a vision of sustainability that may actually be masking a loss of economic freedom, institutional trust, and national sovereignty. Whether you support or oppose Carney, this conversation is essential. It's about accountability, transparency, and asking the hard questions before it's too late. Desiree, welcome to Northern Perspective. It is so great to have you on the show.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you very much.
So, for those that don't know how significant you are in terms of your knowledge within the banking arena, within, let's just call it, the arena of Mark Carney and the elites, let the viewers know kind of your background and how you came to be in a bit of a spotlight and a whistleblower.
Sure. So, I graduated from the London School of Economics and embarked on a regular way, ordinary, linear investment banking career. I worked in London, Frankfurt, and New York. I worked on the structured credit side. And it was about 10 years into my career where I read a book, and it was called Banker to the Poor. And it was by Dr. Muhammad Yunus. And I was introduced to this whole world of socially responsible investing, the origins of ESG, environmental, social, governance investing. So investing for financial returns, but also social and environmental impact. And from there, that was a main thread in my career. And I end up in 2020 with a dream job. I was the chief sustainability officer at Deutsche Bank's asset manager. It's called DWS. And I was in charge of ESG investing at DWS, a similar role to Mark Carney at Brookfield. And I was a true believer. I was a true believer that you could have something called a win-win. You could do well and do good at the same time. But the euphoria didn't last long. It was within a few months of my stint in this role that I stumbled on the fraud of ESG. That ESG was being used as a marketing scam to overcharge investors and mislead shareholders. And I raised these fraud concerns to my boss, who is the CEO, and to the board, and say, whoa, we're pretending to the outside world that we're saving the world. But internally, we're documenting and saying the absolute opposite. This is a whole marketing scam. There's a huge gap between what we're saying publicly and actually what we're doing, and we're documenting internally. And we're going to get in a lot of trouble for this. This is like we're selling snake oil here. And, the authorities are going to jump in. We're already on probation, by the way, with the, authorities in the U.S. And I said, look, there's a solution here. We just have to, state certain things. And I, provided the CEO with an action plan. And the next thing you know, I was fired. I was fired and I was publicly smeared. I didn't know what to do. I just literally got spit out of the system. The first reaction is very disorienting. But then I decided, it took me a while, but then I decided to tell my truth, to take back control of my life, my narrative. And so I addressed their public statements against me. And I, made, a bombshell, statement. And there was a bombshell article in the Wall Street Journal. And my side of the story came out. It ultimately led to really crazy events where the bad people did get in trouble. Not all of them, but a lot of them. And the company had, both a civil enforcement action, the SEC, rendered a guilty verdict that they, the company made material misstatements. And the German authorities, the prosecutors in Germany just also, rendered a guilty verdict. But that definitely left me off the corporate career ladder.
Yeah, that would definitely that would definitely have an impact, I would say. And for those that don't know, what in terms of the portfolio of the of DWS in Deutsche Bank, I think most people have heard of Deutsche Bank, even just from movies and passing references.
Yes.
Yes, The Big Short for sure.
Yeah.
What type of investment amounts are we talking about in terms of the value of that portfolio?
So at the time, the assets under management were close to $1 trillion US. The CEO wanted to make a claim that the majority of these assets, these investments, were either socially responsible or environmentally friendly, or leading to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. All of these catchphrases and exaggerations were used. So the bottom line was this: these investments weren't going to save the planet or the world. Right? The majority of and this, by the way, was not just a local problem. It turns out this was pervasive on Wall Street, that a lot of these ESG portfolios or saving the planet portfolios were investments in like US tech giants like Apple, Microsoft, Nvidia, Alphabet, and these were just, technology companies that are naturally carbon emission light, being dressed up as like saving the planet and the people. What was odious about, this whole and really sinister about the whole ESG, scam is that these were just investments in like large cap companies. But Wall Street, took the opportunity to overcharge. That's what was odious. So they were overcharging for under-delivering, any sort of environmental impact. And in fact, these portfolios largely underperformed the overall market. So like, pensioners, like folks, who have their savings and, in funds and investment products, were losing money, right? And just going to fat cat Wall Streeters, who were claiming that, these investments were doing good. It wasn't the case. The only thing these investments were doing good for, like they were lining, Wall Street's pockets. That was it.
So that must have been quite a shock to you, as you say. You're a couple months into that, and you're probably in a mental state of, great, I'm near the top of the ladder. I'm going to be able to affect some real positive change while also, making some money. And then you start seeing what's going on. Were you second guessing yourself, or did it become immediately apparent that there was a problem?
So my first reaction was that there were overzealous employees, that it was a local problem, that, again, they were just some like hyperbolic salespeople. So when I raised the concerns initially to the CEO, I expected, because we were already on probation for doing lots of naughty things. The company was, at least, for doing lots of naughty things in the U.S. I expected the CEO and the board to take, my concerns seriously. They ignored them. And so another couple of months go by, and that's when the penny starts to drop for me, right? At the beginning, you're just thinking there are a couple of bad eggs. And then I'm clocking, truthfully, there's a holy shit moment where the CEO knows about this, and he's intentionally mismarketing ESG. Remember, at this time, ESG was a boom for companies, right? We're going back to 2020, 2021. At a time where this was peak climate action, Greta Thunberg, all of these, do-gooder movements were really peaking. And, the world has been disoriented with the fallout of COVID. There are lots of social movements like Black Lives Matter. And so people wanted to hear that CEOs were addressing global challenges and the world's ills, if you will. So it was actually a real, if you want to say, it was a benefit for companies. And share prices were reflecting companies that were advanced in ESG, or at least CEOs that were putting out these marketing statements. They were beneficial. So it's at this time where now the penny drops for me, because I was a true believer. And now I'm seeing oh my God, the emperor really has no clothes. And I'm part of this. I'm pushing this too. Right. And then that's when the penny drops, and you're starting to get some market data in as well. Looking at we're doing all this stuff and making all these commitments and pledges, but carbon emissions are going up. And actually, the problem is not I was Europe based. It's the elephant in the room is that China and India are driving up the emissions. we bent the curve, right, in Europe and in the US and Canada, largely because of the abundance and affordability of natural gas. So because of fracking, right, that's the reason why carbon emissions, are starting to be, starting to go down, is not because of like net zero pledges or ESG, but it's because of fracking. And, folks are able, well, economies are able to start decommissioning coal, for a cleaner fossil fuel like natural gas. And that's the reality, right? So you're starting to get all these data points in. And so for me, that was an epiphany, that was an awakening. So it's like you're looking at the market data, experiencing the reality, and I'm seeing the fraud at the same time. So for me, I red pill, if you will, at this time in 2021. I was blindsided. I never expected to get fired and spit out of the system and suddenly, wear this whistleblower hat and be in the public forum. But, sometimes in life, you just go with it, right? This is my new, career, is public speaking and shining a light on this fraud, because it wasn't just that investors were getting ripped off, right? That's bad, right? That it was a ripoff. But there was so much societal harm, right? The effects of ESG, of net zero, DEI, huge societal harm. Everything from, high energy prices to job losses, like reduced productivity, to, on the social side, truthfully, like DEI, I firmly believe, has led to tremendous discrimination and a bigger cancel culture.
Well, and there's a whole bunch in there. One of the things that immediately I zero in on with DEI is the fact that you don't know who has earned what role by merit versus just by how they look. And I've had a lot of employees over the course of my career, many of them women, and I didn't care that they were women. I didn't care where they were from. I just cared if they could do the job. And the problem with DEI is now you're looking at people that are being promoted or hired, and
Based on
it creates
identity.
a double-edged sword. Right. Yeah, it creates a double-edged sword, because not only are the people around them now looking at them saying, "Oh, great, this person, are they any good, or are they just here as a token person, as a product of DEI?" And then the person coming in is also looking at this, then saying, "Well, did I earn this role, or did you just hire me because of how I look?" And now they're in this socially awkward position where there's this unknown between the employees and that person as to why they're even in that role in the first place, and was it merit or was it discrimination that got them there? And in a lot of cases in the workplace, people don't get over that question of why they're there, and it creates a lot of friction and impacts productivity as a whole. Never mind the fact that there's a whole bunch of people that are put into these roles that should not be in these roles, and it has a net negative effect on the company, on productivity, and then as a result on the outcome of this. Now, what I find, I don't have a word for it, I just shake my head, is that we have the 2008 financial crisis created by banks and a bunch of corrupt people, and then it seems that after that, what you're describing is they said, okay, so we need to kind of clean up our image, but
right.
find
Rebrand.
the next way to make money.
Right.
So let's go over here and tell everybody, oh, well, we're for saving the planet now. We're the good guys.
That's right.
And everyone just trusted it. It's just bizarre.
It is remarkable, but that's exactly what happened. This movement takes off in response. Right, you have Goldman Sachs being called the giant vampire squid, right? And so, quickly these CEOs, like as soon as they saw social unrest, post-COVID, every one of them made, you know, bold statements. DEI is our, top priority. We're all about climate action. But they were all hollow statements, and it was, all virtue signaling. There was no real action behind it. But absolutely, they quickly wanted to disguise what they've done and what they were doing, and wrap themselves in some sort of moral cloak. And it does work for a while, until, of course, a number of us, it wasn't just myself, like stood up and called this stuff out and popped, this ESG or green investment bubble, if you will, to show that it was duplicitous and a big thing, like, for my mission. Because I feel, by the way, like, I helped build this monster. We need to dismantle it. It is, the corporate world is still clinging to this, and there's still a lot more work to be done. And just going back to your point on DEI, what I also found, like, so horrible is that the purpose of, like, diversity is ultimately to reflect society and to have diverse thinking. I started in investment banking in 1994, and by this peak ESG period, like, and DEI is a component of ESG, 2020, 2021, I felt that there was paranoia in the boardroom. There was much less speaking up. There was just fear. And the boardroom has become an echo chamber. So even though identity, like, politics kicks in, and you might, superficially see some diversity, because these are, there's a quota system and token hires, cronyism kicks in, right? And suddenly, even though everyone might have a different, look or identity, it's more of groupthink and this, same view, more than ever. And that is astonishing. So DEI, in my mind, led to total groupthink and less diversity.
Yeah, the irony in diversity, equity, and inclusion is the diversity that they're looking for is just how people look. They're not looking for diversity in opinion,
Yeah.
and they only want to include those who think like them. And you see this around corporate Canada, corporate America, and around the globe, as you said. Now, with all of the changes that were happening in terms of where the banking sector was going and where these investment firms were looking at, they're saying, oh, come and invest in these green technologies. And investors say, oh, that sounds great. We're going to have a positive impact on the world. And then all of these investment banks start taking all their fees and all of their cuts of all of this, and they're getting rich no matter how these green companies even perform. To your point earlier, in most cases, they're not performing well. The advertisement of, oh, it's cheaper and greener is actually, it's more expensive and it's less, it's actually more harmful to the planet in many of these investments. We have this book that Mark Carney puts out, and he talks about his vision for the world and the economy. And he talks about intentionally making products more expensive in order to force consumers down a path in which the hyper elite want them. And he seems less interested in democracy and more interested in a technocracy. So now we have Mark Carney moving through his career. He is governor of Bank of England after he leaves Canada, lives in I think it worked out to something like a $20,000 a month Canadian mansion that he was living in, is very neck deep in the World Economic Forum and identifies himself as a European over there, and is really spearheading this ESG and led to this conglomerate called GFANS.
Um,
And for Canadians and other people that are watching this, can you give us kind of the Coles notes of what that is? Because we hear it a lot. We know it's under investigation by some of the Senate committees down in the United States, and they're looking at this and they're not happy. So, how did we get to GFANS?
so, and going back just a little bit of background, while Mark Carney was, of course, governor of the Bank of England, a lot of folks felt um, he was starting to spend more time on climate risk than financial stability, right? So that becomes very pronounced in the UK. And during a time where the UK has like lackluster growth, right? And lackluster productivity numbers. But as soon as his stint ends, of course, he jumps to Brookfield as head of ESG, takes on a whole bunch of other climate advisory roles or just any non-executive positions. One of which is to lead GFANS, which stands for the Global Financial Alliance for Net Zero. And again, this is 2020 at a time where Wall Street is just piling in. And so most of the large financial institutions, banks, asset managers, insurers, all, join this network.
BlackRock was in there among
Oh,
others.
yes. And again, the statement, Mark Carney as the ringleader, and really perceived as the, he is the head of the whole ESG movement globally, right? And
He's the Messiah.
oh, yes. I was, obviously very entrenched in this. It was, and honestly, I'm not exaggerating that I would say 75 to 80% of the conferences that I attended, Mark Carney was always there or zoomed in right on the big screen. And he was really, and he, is considered the ringleader of this whole movement. And, Mark Carney, is promoting climate action, DEI, and making statements like, look, big business, is entirely behind this. Over $130 trillion are being is pledged to net zero, to climate action. We are transitioning the world economy. This is about making energy, ultimately more affordable, creating more jobs, right? This is, the way forward because, of course, we have a climate emergency. So, he was fear-mongering a lot, really talking up a climate catastrophe and emergency. And then, making statements that, everyone was behind this, total agreement, it's obvious, it's science, 97% of, scientists agree that we have this climate emergency and need to reduce emissions immediately. The reality was totally different. It was like a wrecking ball, an absolute wrecking ball of false claims. It wasn't $130 trillion dedicated to climate action. It was just that was the number of the members' assets. It was just assets under management. This wasn't like BlackRock or JP Morgan saying here's our balance sheet and it's going totally towards climate action, or net zero. Is totally false and misleading. Also, what I believe it was false is drumming up a climate emergency. Is there climate change? I believe that. Is there currently a climate emergency? No, I don't believe so. I believe there are other...
Well, if there was, why are all of these environmentalists jetting all over the planet? Like if there was, and this is where the indictment is. If there was seriously a world threat as a result of emissions, the people at the top, I would expect them to get rid of their cars, get rid of their planes. Every meeting would be held by video conference. You wouldn't be jetting all over the planet, and there would be something like that would happen. But that's not what's happening. They don't seem to mind building or expending hundreds of tons of jet fuel, flying around the world and expending all of this quote unquote carbon emission in order to promote their green agenda.
It is mind blowing because GFANS, this whole movement, has been a catastrophic failure. As you pointed out earlier, energy prices didn't go down; they've gone up. There's an argument to be made that Europe, because of net zero policies, made themselves more vulnerable, to Putin, and dependent and vulnerable to Putin. And, with Germany, for example, deindustrializing, banning fracking, banning nuclear, Putin felt like, this is easy. I can march straight through, the Ukraine. What are they going to do? So of course, the fallout from the Ukrainian war, of course, catastrophic to lives, but also, affecting, world feedstock and energy prices, and now mixed with also the mixture of renewable energy, which is more expensive. You've got affordability crises, plaguing the world. You also have tremendous geopolitical tensions. The emergency is like, our urgency is like stopping war. It's helping people have a decent standard of living, right? What's happened to the middle class is outrageous, right? It's food prices, everything has just gone through the roof. And while I'm not saying the entire, the affordability crisis and just solely on net zero, it is a main driver of this affordability crisis. And when you look at, we had a number of elections in 2024. When you look at what matters most to people, right, it's the economy. That's the number one, the key issue on driving votes. It's not the climate agenda as much as Carney wants to drum up that this is the number one. And by the way, the World Economic Forum also, right? They always say the number one risk is the climate emergency. Actually, when you're asking people, it's the affordability crisis, or it's it's safety issues and open borders. It's war, right? These are the main issues, like climate, and all the exit polls when you go around the world for all the elections recently, climate, comes up, but it's number 12 or 13. And that's the other, bad thing about, what Mark Carney did with this whole net zero movement. It distracted us and misled us to believe, right, that is the number one risk. And we took, our eye off the other, very important balls, meaning, we need peace in this world, and people need, decent standards of living. And we need to go back to, our individualism, the meritocracy that we've known in the past, and also democracy, that these are key decisions that should be made. These are value decisions that should be made by people, not unelected elitists, right, in Davos. And people should be deciding what they want to do with their own natural resources, right, with oil and gas. It shouldn't be an elected official, right, with a Davos agenda deciding, right, not to allow a country to have access to both affordable energy, more jobs, and a growth economy.
And this whole thing behind net zero and the investments and all of this, people need to understand that if they really believed in this agenda and they were going to do this, you wouldn't have Brookfield announcing right now that they're acquiring one of the biggest pipelines in the United States for $10 billion. They wouldn't be putting their investments in that. They wouldn't own pipelines in Canada. They wouldn't own pipelines around the world. That's not green energy, that's fossil fuels. And when called out on that, Mark Carney said at committee a few years ago, well, you just don't understand the world economy. No, we understand BS when we can see it, when we can smell it, and that's why we're calling it out. And for those that don't know, GFANS is now falling apart because of all of these investigations that are being spearheaded, mostly in the United States. BlackRock has said, okay, I don't want to be associated with this. See you later. And they're now pulling out of this. They're not pulling out of that because of anything other than the scam is now been caught and they're being called out on it, and people are being ripped off. People don't like being ripped off, especially people that are wealthy people and powerful people that don't know that this is happening. So you have Carney jumping out of that into Brookfield. He was made chair of Brookfield, but all the while, and this seemed to start while he was in the Governor Bank of England position, he's starting to really be interested in forming a lot of very strong ties to strong people in China, the Asia Infrastructure Bank, the Bank of China, Xi Jinping, the president. And over the course of the last 10 years, he has really been building a lot more very secure relationships within the Chinese government. We find that in the fall of 2024, after he's appointed to be the Liberal financial advisor, he immediately jets off to China, has meetings with Xi Jinping, the president. Then he lobbies the mayor of Beijing that, you should be working closer with foreign investors and Western investors, and then has a chat with the head of the Bank of China to secure a $250 million loan for Brookfield in order to stabilize their real estate investments in China. And then immediately says, you know what, I think I'm done with this. I'm going to move over and launch a leadership bid for the Liberal Party of Canada. But that agenda is going to follow him from every inclination that we've seen. So you've recently put out a tweet that the main crisis that is going to go on in Canada is Mark Carney. So from all of your experience, even though you said that you haven't worked directly with him, you've been very aware of him in these circles. What is Canada in for if Mark Carney becomes the leader of the country?
Government overreach, high energy prices, deindustrialization, censorship. That's I traveled for years in his circles. I was part of the World Economic Forum. I worked with his people. And again, I'm very upfront that I was part of it. I was a driving force. But, I start changing in 2021 and I start becoming very contrarian to their agenda in 2022 and pushing back. What was so astounding was this. Being in the room, and you've got, a real network of global elites, and you're talking about academic luminaries, big politicians, and obviously the corporate elite. right? From, every, like the big consulting companies, law firms, banks, asset managers like BlackRock. And what was incredible is that the agenda, it was all about rhetoric, and it was all about driving more regulation, right? More, government policy to control everyone's daily life. But again, like dressed up in that, this little room, like is saving the planet. There was always that phrase, saving the planet and people. And, by 2022, right, over the last few years, like there are a lot of data points coming in. And what was remarkable was how detached everyone in the room is to actually like what's happening in the real world, right? Just a total detachment from democracy. But, their sole goal was just to enshrine these laws, these regulations, so that they have a job for life, right? You have to understand, this is like, it's a big money spinner. ESG is a multi-trillion-dollar industrial complex. So the more you fearmonger, right, and, scare people that there's a climate emergency, the more climate rules you have, controlling everything from how you heat your house, what you drive, or if you could drive, to, what you can use in your economy, your natural resources, to drive, cheaper energy, right? Everything is coming in. And here's the other thing is that if you question, right? So if you question in the World Economic Forum circles, and if you question in a lot of, Western countries today, if you question, say, hang on a second, my electricity bill didn't go down, it's going up. You're called a climate denier. Cancel culture.
Or,
which one?
or, well, just think about how expensive it would be. That's the other line.
It's crazy. And so debate is just not allowed. So when I would raise my hand and say, hang on, right? Net zero hasn't driven cheaper energy or more jobs or more more efficient productivity. DEI isn't driving more diversity of thought. ESG, corporate ESG strategy isn't driving more profitability or, profitability in investments. Immediately you're just, there was a personal attack, right? That you're a climate denier. Like that's what would happen to me in these circles. And the harm on society, the reality, the data points, and even the economic data points. Europe is a leader in this movement, in the Green Deal, right? And you're showing what's happening to Europe. Productivity declines, GDP shrinkage. Look at Germany. Like Germany's a mess. And like there was just this disregard. No one cared. And you're going, wait a second, but you are misleading the public. You are not providing an accurate or truthful cost-benefit analysis. You need to ask people, is it okay if you pay twice as much on your energy bills? You can't just force it down their throat, right? Or say that it's cheaper when it's more expensive. But that's what it's like to be in the room there with Carney's people. It's just you're personally attacked, you're silenced, you're dismissed. It is about it's about their power play because they have a job for life. And again, this is like, it's, these are, folks, they're on the center stage, right? They're praised because they're doing good. They all dress in this moral cloak. They take this moral superiority stance when the last thing that they will discuss is the effects on ordinary citizens. And I always point down in these circles to this day, there's a difference between intention, aspiration, and results. And you can't judge a policy on its intention. Milton Friedman said this. You have to judge it. It's very dangerous to judge a policy on intention. You have to judge it on results. The results are in, and it's negative. And that's what is so scary about this total dismissal of the market data, the economic data coming in. And that's what I found very, very scary and very, it's subverting democracy. There are times where we get it wrong. And that's okay, right? Human nature is flawed. But these folks, I don't care. Mark Carney's on a bunch of boards. He's made so much money. Brookfield and Bloomberg and Stripe and PIMCO. And then he has all his influence around all these big universities, Harvard and Oxford and think tanks and World Economic Forum. He gets, I think, I don't know for sure, but I believe he's getting six figures for some of his speaking engagements. So, he's making a bundle. And guess what? That's okay, right? We live in a capitalist society. All right. But what is disgusting is that he's disingenuous. There's a con here. Because while he's lining his pocket, and remember, he's not elected. He's just being appointed, right? And he's moving up this political ladder. Not off of success, not off of helping people, but he's dressing it up as if his legacy, to date, his heritage is all about working for people and saving the planet. It's a total opposite. It's a total power play. Get more regulation, get more government control, more fear mongering. So, these people can stay in power. They can subvert people into subservience and really line their pocket, because each of these advisory gigs, boy, are they lucrative. And these are big jobs, getting big fat salaries, pretending that they're helping. Just the opposite. That's what I would say. GFANS, the World Economic Forum, it's just these are just vested interest groups, misleading the public and suppressing the public.
Well, and you have this, I think what a lot of people don't take into account is that whenever there is a crisis, doesn't matter what it is, there's going to be a group of people that get rich off of it, because a crisis creates a existential need for some product, whether it's war, and in that case, all of the war machine manufacturers, they're the ones getting rich, and that's what we saw in the 20th century. It was a vested interest for the U.S. to always be at war with somebody, and they did everything that they could to ensure that was the case. But then when kind of world peace started to kind of introduce itself as slowly as it did, there needed to be a new emergency to get people rich. Well, what ended up happening? Well, now we have the energy crisis and we have the climate crisis. And to your point, I think the Liberals have now found out that they're not going to get elected off of the climate crisis. So what is the new crisis now? Well, it's the Trump crisis. And a lot of people are trying to point out that the issue with Canada did not begin with Trump. And much to our amazement, maybe we shouldn't be surprised, but Carney recently said in a press conference that the affordability crisis caused right now is not caused by anyone in this country. And it's just shocking to hear him say that when you have 10 years of failed far left policy that have doubled and in some cases tripled housing costs in Canada, have shrunk our GDP dramatically. Our GDP per capita is actually showing that our living standards are going down instead of going up. And our healthcare system is a mess. Immigration is out of control by a group called the Century Initiative, trying to increase our population to 100 million by the end of this century. And now you have Mark Carney coming in and saying, you know what? All of your problems are caused by Donald Trump, and you need to trust my resume. And ironically, I think Canadians need to look at that and say, yes, we need to trust your resume. And we're going to evaluate that and say, you're a disaster. We don't want you as leader of this country, because you're already trying to steal credit for navigating the 2008 financial crisis in Canada. All you did was adjust interest rates, and you were advising to print more money. And thank goodness the Conservative government at the time said no. And the previous Liberal government is also criticizing Carney for saying that, because they're saying, well, wait a minute, we helped avoid the financial crisis by introducing legislation to prevent a lot of the mortgage elasticity that was going on in the United States. So it was the previous Liberal and then subsequent Conservative government that actually navigated that. Then he goes over to England and said, well, I navigated England through Brexit. What does that even mean? What does that even mean? And then you went to Brookfield, and you're creating tax havens for their money. There's new reports coming out that they are, violating the rights of Indigenous peoples all over the world in the pursuit of investments. And then he's trying to come in Canada and saying, I will help all the little people now. I have made all my money. Canada is in an existential crisis. I'm going to help all the little people. Never mind that he was at a conference in the fall of 2024 where he was asked, about public policy, and his response was, well, we need to affect change in public policy so it impacts the market. And he was asked, are you going to, get closer to public office? And he refused to answer. So it's interesting that in the fall of 2024, you have Mark Carney essentially saying the quiet part out loud, that people get rich if we can ensure that public policy and regulation forces the market to go where we want it to, and we already have our money there. And he gave his first inclinations that he was going to run for public office then. And our theory had been that he has been massaging all of these relationships with China, and we don't know what he's done with his assets prior to coming in public office, and we won't know until after the election, conveniently. But our theory is that he is now he's running to be prime minister in order to affect that public policy, which is going to then further make him monstrously rich with all of the investments that Brookfield has embedded in China, and preventing pipelines in Canada in order to jack up the investment value that Brookfield is about to have. And the last thing that I'll say in my ramble is, the most shocking thing to me is that the day that Mark Carney called an election, his successor at Brookfield on the same day was meeting with Xi Jinping, president of China. If that doesn't stand the hairs up on the back of your neck, I don't know what will.
It is, that's why I, posted what I did is because, I have like inside insights. And right now, U.S. tariffs, that is just not like Canada's crisis. Electing Carney will be. He is not telling the truth about the affordability crisis. He's not telling the truth about the climate hoax. And he will shrink the economy. And again, I just point to Germany. Look what the Green Deal has done to Germany, this Davos agenda. And just think about like your own freedoms, right? Freedom of speech, freedom to decide, what you want to drive, how you want to heat your house, being able, to work and earn a decent standard of living. And Mark Carney and these Davos elites, and again, I also consider most of the leaders in Europe and the current administration in the UK, they're all the same. They all have the same agenda. And you look at, and you can just look at, there's plenty of economic data to show that this leads to less productivity, lower GDP per capita. It leads to less innovation, less research and development spend, right? Less of a startup culture. And then very scarily, it leads to limits. It is all connected to limits on free speech, on the ability to debate, the ability to disagree, dissent, to protest. Look at Carney's op-ed, in response to the truckers' rebellion, right? I mean, calling that sedition and debanking people, right? He will promote a central bank digital currency. That is extremely scary. The government has full control on your life and can spit you right out of society. So, I would say first and foremost, for democratic values, do not vote for him if you have any, value on democracy, but also, for economic prosperity. This guy is just like a natural resource thief. I think it's disgusting not to. Canada is such a rich, is so natural resource rich. Even if, let's say, in the future, climate change does become a big problem, you need economic growth and prosperity to address it. You can't have a shrinking economy. You can't address problems when the lights go out, And, so that I felt, strongly, because I have these World Economic Forum insights, and I've traveled with Carney's circle. I'm still in their circle. I still am the contrarian voice in the room. I thought it was important because I could just see another crisis. His brand is crisis. Carney's brand is crisis, and he's manufacturing the one, and that's duplicitous. It's not right.
Well, the good news is there's millions of Canadians across this country that have seen through it. There's millions of Canadians across this country that are ready to stand up for change, and they're not believing the polls that are being fed to them. And in our work in working with the EDAs around us, and in door knocking, talking to voters, it's a different message that we're hearing at the doors when we're talking to real people versus what is being rammed down everybody's throat from the mainstream media, which is Mark Carney is this savior. People, the average Canadian, they don't even know who Mark Carney is. And what they're most concerned about is, how do I pay my next grocery bill? And they're having a hard time doing that right now. So we still have a couple of weeks in this election to make sure that we secure a common sense victory and move away from this radical left agenda that has just decimated our country for the last 10 years. And I hope that most Canadians can see that we cannot afford essentially more of the same or even worse when it comes to Mark Carney, Justin Trudeau's successor. But I want to thank you, Desiree, for your courage. That must have been really daunting, having to stand up and call that out and continuing that fight, because a lot of people will criticize people. Well, you used to be a part of that. Well, in a lot of cases, you have to have been a part of that in order to see what is actually going on and to be able to call it out effectively. So I applaud you for that, and I'm sure a lot of our viewers will be applauding you for that. And our message is, keep doing what you're doing. We're all behind you. We need to call out this hypocrisy. We can't let these corrupt bankers just continue to tell the world what they need and get rich off of it. Whenever they move on from the climate crisis, there's going to be another one, no doubt, that they're going to try and get rich off of. So thank you so much for what you do, and thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much. Thank you.